Well, I think in 2023, when ChatGPT came out first, people were using it to write poetry or make up songs to the theme of Bob Dylan. But I think people quickly understood what this technology was capable of.
What's happening in major scale, like if you look at the way OpenAI is going or the way other platforms are going, it's using a small model to decide if it should use a small model or it should use a big model.
What are you thinking about for the future? You know, what skills do you want your children to have? What skills do you think are going to be relevant? Welcome to the show, James Hatzell, CEO of Hatz AI. Welcome to the show, Conor Twomey, CEO of AI One.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to Cambridge. We are live-ish from the April 15th Imagination in Action event, where we've got some of the global leaders in AI stopping by the MIT Media Lab, and we jumped out to have a quick conversation. Thank you for being here, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Delighted to have a chinwag with my man, Jimmy. This is great. This is 2 for 1.
I'm just glad to hear Conor, to be honest.
No.
Everything he says with that voice,
Yeah.
the accent does couple off, as I've pointed out to a few people.
There's plausible deniability, you see.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I would say one thing I wanted to get both your takes on to start is, you know, we've been hearing, and, you know, we've got friends that are in the data center business, that kind of capital markets have been a little bit locked up in terms of, I would say, fear about this data center CapEx boom that has been driving public markets across the board, that has been driving a lot of enthusiasm about AI, basically that they've overbuilt and that the inference time workloads won't come. What I think is very interesting is a comment that you made and that your engineer Arian made about kind of getting rate limited on basically every single LLM that you use. So maybe like tee off on that one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as a founder working on the ground, like rate limits are real. You run into them with new models, especially longer context models. It's very difficult for public clouds specifically, and LLM providers just in general, to forecast how many chips they need to deploy and how many data centers they need to spin up. And there's a constant push and pull with cloud providers on how much exactly are you going to use. Mm-hmm. And we can provision that much, but if you use any less, you're not going to have that anymore. So it's difficult from a founder perspective to, you know, scale up, obviously.
Yeah.
You've got to do all sorts of things that, you know, we do, and I think we do well of, you know, load ballacing and all of that. But the number of, if the number of users stays the same and the amount of time on the platform stays the same, which it's not at all, the number of queries to an LLM will only go up because of, you know, I know Conor said we're not going to use the word Asian as much.
It's a dirty word.
Yeah, dirty word. I mean, I'm going to say it's a lot.
Yeah. Chains of requests, I'll say.
I love
chains
that.
Of
exactly. Talk about automations.
Yeah.
Talk about chain tasks together in a way that's autonomous.
Yeah. So we've realized
that the A word.
Yeah. We very quickly realized that, you know, text in, text out on an LLM has its limitations. So if you do text in, text out, and then text back in again, then text back out again, then, you know, over and over again, and maybe hit some tools along the way. Yeah. Like the amount of inference that happens is multiplying very, very, very fast, and will continue to do so.
Well, and I think one thing that's a little bit unique about this particular technology is the kind of like profligacy with which you can eat up tokens, because like token expense is not aligned to the way you pay for tokens today, like unless you're using the API. Mm-hmm. I mean, like I was like vibe coding this morning in Cursor, which I do like all the time. Was I going to make a point? Okay. Sorry, the point. I was vibe coding.
Frazer can code, by the way.
Yeah. In case I didn't make that clear. So I was vibe coding in Cursor this morning, and of course, the thing that I coded up didn't work. And then,
but you were vibe coding, so you just ripped it back down and started again, right?
With a different model.
Exactly. That's it. That's how we vibe, man.
I mean, that at least I was attempting to do something. But what's amazing is with this technology, I would imagine you maybe see some of this at Hatz, is when new users get on, they just want to mess around for a while. And, you know, that was cool when there was like, you know, 100,000 people using like ChatGPT, but at scale, it's kind of a problem. I mean, like, what do you think about that?
Well, I think in 2023, when ChatGPT came out first, people were using it to write poetry or make up songs to the theme of a Bob Dylan classic. So if you want to call that the kind of the fucking around time. But I think people quickly understood what this technology was capable of. And when we're working with enterprises, we typically bucket sort of advancements in frontier technology. I'm deliberately not using the word AI or agents, but into three categories. And I think there was automations. So taking a look at where robotic process automation failed in the past. I think there's the better search and general efficiency of workflows, which Hatz, I think, does a world-class job of doing. And then thirdly is around software development. And when I think of token consumption, I think the way that people have been interacting with their systems has been primarily around asking a question as a one-time event. So standalone, want to ask a question, tokens get consumed, I get my response. As we work more closely towards automated workflows, it's event-driven architectures.
Is that an agent?
I'm not going to use the word agents. I can describe what it is without having to use the word, because Mark Benioff has killed it with his agents force. And the CEO of Workday standing up and telling executives that we should be onboarding our agents like you onboard a junior employee with an education plan, and didn't quite go as far as benefits, but might as well have inferred it. So I don't like to talk about agents specifically.
You have some beef with Matthew McConaughey.
Which, nice.
How dare you?
The disdain for the agent. Yes. The second category, which is around enterprise search, the third is around being able to use AI to develop software. And as we move away from direct models to more reasoning models, the amount of tokens consumed is upwards of 180x. And that's through recursion, which Jimmy was talking about, which was taking an answer, understanding are you in the right path, doing a recursion that's almost seamless. So the rise of token consumption is just beginning. And I think it's going to take off exponentially, particularly as we move to event-driven architectures around it, which is a fancy way of saying a thing happens that causes a set of workflows to automatically kick off. And those things will have reasoning inbuilt in terms of their automations. What should you do next? Based on new information becomes available, how can I marry that to the context of history to decide what's likely going to happen next?
How do you think about the change management piece, like for the enterprise? Because we hear, and I mean, you should probably talk a little bit again to remind the viewers who have grown since last time you appeared on the show.
Nice.
Basically, the enterprise, we're hearing from like, why aren't we getting more out of AI? Why aren't we adopting AI? We should be adopting AI. How do we adopt AI? A lot of these enterprises are in our funds for the reason of getting access to folks like YouTube. At the same time, people like want all this adoption to happen, but they haven't gotten the bill for their employees using reasoning models to, set to-dos and build grocery lists and figure out where to have dinner when they're on vacation. How is that piece going to happen? Because the bill's going to come, and I think the enterprise is going to be like, oh my God. I mean, they already joke about how we'd moved to the cloud and it cost twice as much as we thought.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that question. I think if people take a look at the enterprise cloud journey as a proxy that began maybe in 2014 under a fallacy that, in fact, this was going to become an infrastructure utility that we could all share a lower economic value to by subscribing. And so people realized quite quickly that that was not the benefit of moving to the cloud at all. In fact, it became a forcing function for continuous integration, continuous deployment. And so when people do a retrospective on what were the main benefits of our cloud transformation that we spent $100 million on and a whole pile of corporate energy, it's the ability to push out new feature functionality. But you didn't need the cloud to do that. There was a better way of working. So I think the cost concern around AI hasn't manifested for a variety of reasons. People are experiencing a 30x productivity boost in weekend project or home projects. But the nascent field of agentic platforms and agentic software engineering platforms are incredibly enterprise naive. They don't understand core principles like security, entitlements, permissions, authorization, and access. And so they're very naive in terms of what data can be used in the tools. I think there's a lot of people who struggle with these upstarts being prescriptive around how ideas move from prototype into production. And if there's one thing that kind of 16 years of working in large enterprises has taught me is every enterprise is different on that journey. And so you need to be able to align to the organization. And the third area is really around a situational awareness or enterprise awareness on how data can be used, what models can be accessed, can personal information be used in service of specific activity, everything from California data law to data sovereignty. And so there's a variety of reasons why these new technologies are going and being released at an incredible pace, but aren't being absorbed into the enterprise in a meaningful way. And I'm happy to get on my soapbox about data lakes, but we'll save that maybe for later in the discussion.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. Jimmy, you made like an affirmative sound and nodded your head. What was going through your head? Because you come from maybe less of an enterprise background, but security first background. Like
Definitely
using help responsibly.
Yeah, there's not an incentive for on the ground employees to tell their employer how they're using AI and when they're using AI, because it's like in many cases it gets rejected by the IT and security teams as something that we definitely can't do because security rules, and then the employee just like loses it after that, like it's just over their head. And also if you are gaining 30x on a weekend project and you can do some part of your job a lot faster or get from mile 1 to mile 5, in seconds rather than a day or two, you're going to do it most likely. But because of security and privacy terms, they're not, telling their employer that they're actually doing it. So you have this, shadow AI that pops up. And that's aside from all of the sort of lack of incentives around telling your employer that you actually can take on more capacity right now, right? There's definitely loads of people out there who are getting their job that's been prescribed to them for the past couple years done a lot faster with the help of AI that isn't technically approved. And they're very much enjoying their longer lunches and maybe their extra dog walks during the day. Yeah. So why would they tell their employer that? And that's not everyone, but
it's a lot of people.
It's
dogs.
So this like top down approach that enterprise and SMB security teams and C teams, C suites sort of default to of like, this is how we're going to roll it out. We're going to be prescriptive. We're going to go through these different phases. It doesn't quite work in the way of AI because it's a bottom up technology where people are using it at home on the weekends. Nobody was spinning your average, accountant or whatever wasn't spinning up AWS over the weekend to, code some to-do lists.
Yeah.
But Jimmy, you have an incredibly important point. And if 55% of professionals in the US are using generative AI on a daily basis in their workplace, regardless of whether it's permitted or not. And so often when we work with CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies, we're telling them like not having an AI plan, your customers are using it and it's manifesting in major risk. And so you need to create an outlet. And we saw in the tail end, if 2023 was the year of poetry and Bob Dylan music writing, 2024 was really the year where employees were demanding access to this sort of technology, wanting to work for a company, a tribe, that was going to be forward-leaning in terms of innovation. And in 2025, it's really manifesting itself on the customer side. And so if a product or service cost 100 units in 2023, in 2025, 2 years later, that product or service should cost 85 units. And it could manifest itself in faster code delivery, a cheaper cost to support the actual underlying product or service. And so customers are saying, hey, where's the benefit to me? Am I going to see a more reliable service? Am I getting my roadmap delivered at twice the speed? Is there a cost saving, some combination of that, or worse, none of it? And so customers are beginning to vote with their feet now. And I think there's an existential crisis amongst large companies that realize that as the cost dynamic changes from an 85% expectation down to maybe 25 cents on the dollar to support a specific product or service, that people can come in and really disrupt entire business models.
Yeah.
And the first mover will be the last mover. So check out Hatz AI if you're in the SMB space.
Or enterprise. We'll take
or enterprise, yes. Although if you're in the enterprise, we'd prefer you to come to AI1 and have conversation.
Why choose?
Yeah, exactly.
You can just do things in life.
You can have both. Correct. Yeah. Yes.
When you said if 2023 was the year of poetry and Bob Dylan and 2024 was the year of like joining a tribe that was AI forward at the enterprise, I was like, God, AI is becoming square.
Exactly.
The hippie movement has died.
That's why he sold out.
Yeah, I sold that big time. We were talking about kind of the cost curve coming down, sort of profligate use of tokens on sort of like trivial tasks. Was chatting earlier with someone at the event about kind of general belief that fine tuning could start to have its day relatively soon, especially at the enterprise, maybe using open source models, maybe miniaturized open source models for very specific tasks.
Yeah.
When you and I kind of started talking about your business, Conor, probably a year ago, which is crazy to me, but we weren't hearing any pushback from the enterprise on bringing the hyperscaler, closed platform ecosystem into the enterprise. Like that would sort of, I don't know if you're getting any pushback now, or there's more of a capability and anticipation of a need to change the cost curve that's going to bring these open source models into the enterprise. Like, how are you thinking about that?
I think the shift is manifesting itself from better enterprise search as the general North Star to large-scale automation now as the general North Star. Mm. And so under better search, the open models or the closed models off the shelf were getting better and faster and stronger at giving a mathematical representation of these documents, of these materials, of emails, of PDFs, whatever it might be. And so when people were ranking in their mind what model is best for this use case, you'd often think of 4 key metrics. And I think we might have covered this in the last session. But a quick reminder for everyone back home. Accuracy, if I ask this system 100 questions or 1,000 questions, how many times does it hallucinate or come back with something erroneous? The second metric is latency. If I ask this system a question, I use the word system very deliberately. If I ask this system a question, how quickly can I get a response? And that can determine what workflows I can deploy this technology into. Yeah. The third is to get from where I am to this nirvana state of actually being successfully deployed. How painful is it? How long will it take? How much will it cost? And the fourth element is the run cost. And so if I were to actually roll this out to all my employees or to all of my customers or to all of my workflows, do the unit economics make sense? Yeah. So those are the four pillars of value or the 4 pillars of pain, whichever way you want to view them. And I think for enterprise search, people were very happy with closed source or open source off the shelf. Yeah. I think when it comes to specific domain, specific workflows, there's an opportunity for 2 things. One is to improve the accuracy. Yeah. And so for specific domains and small models, purpose-trained models and fine-tuning play an active role there. Yeah. The second is around the unit economics. And so, for example, I do not need to use ChatGPT 4.0 through the API key to understand is NY the same thing as New York in a specific address field. And so the idea that you're handing a joystick now to an enterprise to be able to optimize accuracy versus complexity versus cost is something that's only manifesting itself now in enterprise large-scale automation.
Yeah, that's going to take a lot of work. I mean, that's a lot of, if you really break it down probably into the components that it should, like that is a lot of models that are going to have to be deployed and managed. Like even in like, for the most kind of rudimentary of tasks that you would have had to hard code, maybe it's 5 rules, 6 rules, maybe it's 35 rules, but like you would just probably use a small model for a lot of that stuff today. And that's a grand task to take on.
It is.
Yeah.
Jimmy, you provide some perspective and I'll add to it.
No, I think it's not as hard as everyone thinks because what's happening at major scale, like if you look at the way OpenAI is going or the way other platforms are going, it's using a small model to decide if it should use a small model or it should use a big model. Yeah. And people are very quickly realizing in their workflow, if I need to look at this document and tell me whether it goes in this folder or this folder, you can fine tune a model. You can run it very cheaply. If I need to propose a solution to this very complex thing, maybe a more expensive reasoning model, and maybe you're willing to pay whatever it costs, even if it's $1 instead of 1 cent, to get a 10% or 20% gain. It depends on the task and sort of like the value associated with the task. Yeah. So I think like there's a huge divide amongst abstraction in sort of what's going on in the background of AI.
Yeah.
So you have the people working in AI every day, and they want no abstraction. They want to know, okay, did we use, a fine-tuned Llama 3.2 to, do this? Or we did it in the cloud. We did, Amazon Nova Micro, right? Because it's very cheap. And then it chose to use 4.0, because it's a writing thing or whatever like that, But the end users, they just want it to sort of happen and for it to just do it in the background.
Yeah.
And there's sort of like a bias for builders in AI to build for other builders and build for first adopters and first movers. But it's not in reality what happens at scale. Like people just want it to work.
Something that we've talked about, I think all three of us, maybe in several conversations, but what's different about this adoption curve is compared to cloud, which I think is the one that, like, at least from a VC's perspective, it's a way that like my industry made a lot of money and founders made a lot of money. So it's the only thing that actually matters. And with that, I'll take a quick break. Icebreakers. Break the ice. In case anybody was wondering if this was a Zin or something, it's not. And icebreakers, we are open to sponsorship.
This is the new watermelon duo, both cool and fruity.
Yeah.
Thank you, pal.
Is that the adoption is coming from below. I mean, as you said, 55% of professionals using LLM technology that they probably pay for their personal license at work already. We've talked about the issues with enterprise adoption. It does sound to me, Jimmy, kind of having followed both of your companies fairly closely, is that the SMB is like almost advantaged because a lot of SMBs are kind of operated like a jack of all trades, like a Swiss Army knife, a lot more redundancy and skill specialization. And this technology is so powerful, zero shot, it's almost kind of like tailor-made for it. Like, curious, when your MSP customers are onboarding clients, like what are those initial aha moments like for them? Tell me about these success you've seen.
So if you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you've been following AI somewhat closely. And the fact that a lot of our customers or the partners or the customers that our partner meet with outside of 1 to 2 employees are seeing generative AI in action for the first time when they're demoing our product. And that's really where half of the workforce is at, right? Like, it's a huge divide.
Yeah.
So when you're like, hey, this can, help you write emails and help you summarize this and help you, generate your report or evaluate, whatever spreadsheet that you normally get. They're like, really? I didn't know that I could do that.
Yeah.
So there's a huge bias too for investors and builders that like the average user is way further ahead than they are. And there's a lot of people getting caught up in, what's 10% better or 20% better because the news cycle is so fast and there's so much happening with AI. And it can feel like every time you build something, you need to throw it out and rebuild it. But a lot of people are just missing the follow through moments of like, okay, so this technology is capable of helping me write this report that I do every single day. How do I actually do that?
Yeah.
And instead we're like, well, this could help you write it 10% faster, or this could help you write it 2% better.
Yeah.
So I just think that there's a disconnect from reality of where, a large percentage of the workforce is actually at. They need people to come down to their level.
Yeah.
At least in SMB.
Yeah.
Very interesting. The challenge on the enterprise side is a data challenge. And we'll hear it all the time that there's no AI strategy without a data strategy. And so CEOs come in super frustrated. They're like, I want my AI today. And CIOs and CTOs are telling them, you can't have your AI today because we need to complete our data lake journey, our data transformation. So lakes, warehouses, lake houses, fabrics or meshes.
Yeah.
All of these unnecessary complexities.
Yeah.
We often tell the CEO, I know that you want and need AI, but what you need is correlation statistics, analytics, and prescriptive and automations often. And so the very first place to start with is what are you actually trying to accomplish? And before we talk about the what, let's figure out the why. Why are you trying to accomplish it? Is it an existential crisis because you need to change your business model? Is it you've got very dissatisfied customers that you're losing market share? So start with the why.
Yeah.
Then move into the what. Don't talk about the how at all.
Yeah.
Because very often these conversations descend into the how far too early.
Yeah.
So once you've identified the why and the what, you can begin to do some ROI analysis.
Yeah.
So understanding the TCO, or with a capital T, the total cost, including API calls, including cloud costs, including data lakes like Snowflake, Databricks, or these companies that I think are fairly redundant now.
Yeah.
I think people really struggle to understand the ROI, and 80% of all AI projects fail because there's a lack of understanding of the ROI before people begin.
Yeah.
And so data has been the stumbling block or the blocker unnecessarily. And I think the ability for people to understand data and data stores and schemas and models in better ways, I think now unlocks a lot of automations, a lot of AI that people need.
Let's say that the why is customers are asking for it. I mean, I can imagine, well, I don't need to imagine because like I've had this experience of interacting with some kind of a service provider that I use and being like, I wish I could just talk to it, communicate asynchronously, know that it was going to solve the issue that I had, that kind of QA was going to work. What other and so like that service provider needs AI to make me happy. What other
Do they?
maybe?
I don't think they do. I don't think they need AI to be able to receive your query and question and then to be able to service that in a more timely and accurate manner and more reliable manner.
Okay.
Yeah, very, very often you don't need some, autonomous knowledge engine doing that autonomously. I don't believe you do.
Okay. What do you mean?
I think you need to be able to understand the situational awareness of Frazer. So let's say you're texting that you're dissatisfied with the quality of a specific product that you purchased. The ability to understand the context and join together.
So let's be like, I will be very concrete. So I booked a hotel last weekend and got an email confirmation, and the hotel is owned by one of these, like, I would imagine second or like third tier management companies that like buy hotels that are not particularly glamorous. I'm going to a not a very glamorous place.
Okay, great.
Against my will.
Yes.
And is very rare for me. So
tell us more.
I booked this hotel and I got the email confirmation, and then I'm going with a friend and told him this is the hotel that I booked, and he went to go book his room at the hotel, and it said the hotel's closed that date because it's a janky system that like when the hotel sells out, they just say we're closed.
Okay.
To new guests. So then like I had to call to confirm to make sure there wasn't an issue in the system. Like,
that's not a fun experience.
No, it's not a fun experience. I should be able just to communicate.
Yep.
And so like, and you're saying there should be enough data given that the purchase happened with a credit card online to not use an AI system to answer?
I don't think it needs to be AI based. I don't think that hotel management company needs to sit down and say, we need an AI strategy.
Yeah.
I think what they need to do is find a better outsourcing provider who actually provides the sort of SLAs and KPIs around responsiveness. So they just need a better provider. I don't think they need an AI play. I think they just need to do better.
Yeah. Okay.
So this actually brings up a really interesting conversation around outcome-based pricing.
Yeah.
So people are, super excited about AI systems that charge, $1 per resolution or, some amount of money per resolution.
Yeah.
And that being the pricing model. And then in practicality, what it is it puts the earnestness on the user to actually configure that system, which in many cases is getting the right data in the right places.
Yeah.
And, providing sample questions, sample answers, run books, all of that may or may not have existed, but had never been normalized into, a format that an AI could read. And then they go and do all that, and they do all that work. And then their bill is higher than the person who didn't do all that because the other person's bill, they didn't do all of that and the AI couldn't resolve anything.
Yeah. So classic moral hazard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's it's somewhat irrelevant to the conversation around pricing and all of that, but it's a similar vein of you have to do the work to set it up right. In many cases for production ready systems to run properly, and that work isn't fine tuning in LLM at the start. It's give it the instructions that need to be done.
But I think there's a fascinating like price discovery happening around commercial models at the moment. You've got OpenAI, who started at $20 a month, added their pro version, $200 a month or $100 a month, flirted for a moment about raising the price to $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
So I think people are still trying to figure out how do they peg or associate value creation, because it's not just about, taking costs out of existing businesses. It's about doing things that you couldn't do before as well. So how do you attribute value to that?
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest shifts that people have from a mindset perspective is dealing with deterministic systems, which is I ask it a question, I get a response. It's the same question, the same answer, to a hybrid probabilistic and deterministic.
Yeah.
And so, Jimmy, I think as people are getting more comfortable with that new way of working, they won't need to be incentivized on an outcome-based price as much, because they'll be more confident. There'll be more success stories that they can point to talk about why they should adopt the technology. So I think it was Intercom that did a great job of bringing that commercial model forward, and I applaud them for their creativity, but I don't think it's going to be the end point specifically. I'm a big believer in services as software as the new paradigm. So the death of the billable hour. And that is, SaaS was created to allow enterprises to kind of scale with their ambition with a low operating cost input, no CapEx. And so it was very, I suppose, financial engineering aligned to the growth story of a company. I think what we're seeing with services as software is a professional services type outcome where software is actually being used to deliver that.
Yeah.
So rather than a SaaS product supporting an accountant to get someone's books and records completed, services as software is the accountant.
Yeah.
And I think what you're going to see is some sort of blend where the pricing will align more with a professional services type engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how people flip that from a CapEx expenditure into an OpEx expenditure, I think is going to be around the managed environment.
Yeah.
So creating SLAs and KPIs that support specific business activities.
Yeah.
And as people repurpose their organizations, they think of a 200,000 person company who are trying to automate some of the mundane activities and bring in more strategic people.
Yeah.
I think that operating cost is going to change and shift dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there also seems to be a general trend, at least, well, I mean, with private equity and public businesses, is like there's certainly with privately owned businesses is there's less reticence to pay what feels like an onboarding cost or like an engagement cost, as long as the like sort of run rate expense is relatively low and like is that, you touch the EBITDA as little as possible. Is that something you're seeing already, or is that like a mentality that you think aligns? Like, I guess that sort of feels like professional services, right? You go and you do a project and like now you have the thing.
Well, I think one of the things dealing with large enterprises for my entire career is that you understand in most industries, they operate either on an annual cycle, a semi-annual cycle, or a quarterly cycle.
Yeah.
And so knowing, it's almost a bit like short-term politics.
Yeah.
People need to be able to show results within a 1 year time window, within a 3 year time window, and a 5 year time window. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to bring someone on a 12-year long journey, that involves a lot of capital expenditure up front, that's a very difficult challenge.
Yeah.
But when you can begin to use the technology to challenge what was, and where's this camera? The product management triangle.
3 cameras.
Camera 2. The product management triangle, which said that the old adage that there was time, cost, and quality, and that you could only ever pick 2. So pick 2. You can never have all 3. That's changed with generative AI. As the cost of writing software goes to 0, the time to deliver software goes to 0. Time is now you're able to deliver programs unthinkably quickly, which means that you can now operate what would have been a 3-year cycle in a 1 year cycle.
Yeah.
And so when you can begin to talk about return on investment and IRR that's measured in months instead of years, it's incredibly powerful in the enterprise.
Yeah. Jimmy, so your company, I always think of as kind of like a network of networks, and that you have a network of MSPs, then they have a network of customers. We've been talking about the investor mentality, how like CEOs, owners of businesses are asking for AI. If you kind of take that one abstraction level up, you think about sort of majority control owners, private equity funds that have all these software companies, asset-light businesses, often services businesses with healthy margins, thinking about AI. I feel like you both have sort of played in the space a little bit, or like had outbound, and maybe that's a function of the network more than serious intent to do things yet, or maybe it isn't, but curious, maybe Jimmy, you first and then flip back to Connor, but like how engaging with that community or how kind of the owners of assets are thinking about deployment and is that an effective channel for you? Because it's a channel we've spent quite a lot of time in our funds and our portfolio companies over the years. And I would say in certain very kind of idiosyncratic products where like the product is meaningful to the private equity analyst, it tends to be successful, but sometimes they just can't be bothered. But curious if AI is different.
I mean, I would say every sort of private equity style, roll up of IT businesses that I've talked to has some sort of direction.
Yeah.
And in most cases, a newly hired team a couple months into the role, or maybe a year or two into the role, for the more mature companies or more forward looking, whose directive is use AI and automation to save time and create efficiencies across the portfolio as much as possible.
Yeah.
And then they have a second direction from these same individuals, or often the CEO of the top operating company, that says, our business has some risk and we need to move into servicing AI as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And as big as possible. And everyone needs to learn it because that's how we can create long-term value for our own business.
Yeah.
So from a private equity or, big sort of M&A sort of roll up like project or, you would know better than I the correct terms to call these businesses. They're all getting heavy direction to integrate AI as soon and fast as possible. And there's interest from all of the operating companies to do so because they like it. And maybe that's just because I work with IT providers and, they're a little bit nerdy and think it's cool.
Yeah.
I think it manifests itself in two places. Within a business, it's the ability to come in and reduce operating cost, not just marginally, but drastically. And what we've seen in the past is the approach that, particularly in service-heavy businesses, has been labor arbitrage, outsourcing, nearshoring. And I think the opportunity now is people who are setting the table for AI shoring, which is
trademarked.
I believe, aishore.com. Check it out. And so, but in all seriousness, people who want to be able to automate as much of the mundane. And I think there's a private equity company based in Italy who kind of set a trend, bending spoons.
Yeah.
So they bought Evernote. Yeah. Did you guys have Evernote back in the day?
God.
Who didn't have Evernote?
It was like for every like kind of precocious think boy, like have Evernote, like have all your thoughts in one place.
Yes.
Like, aggregate your aspirations.
Exactly right. And so they acquired Evernote. They reduced 80% of the costs and used automations to push out features twice as fast and improve reliability. So they've got a vastly superior product.
Yeah. Are you using Evernote?
I am not currently using Evernote, but I love the story of Evernote. I commend Bending Spoons for what they've achieved. And I think you're going to see that on an individual, from a private equity perspective, people kind of really looking to take sniper shots at where they can replicate that sort of success.
Yeah.
I think the second area is around data mergers specifically. So when you identify where a 1 + 1 = 3 value proposition from a data perspective, you've got incredible products and amazing distribution. And when you put them together with fantastic data assets, you can be very, very potent and powerful. And integrating these systems in the past would have been a 2-year-long endeavor. Yeah. So we're working with one client who has 4 CRM systems in their main company. They've acquired 2 other businesses, each have 2 more CRMs.
Yeah.
And so they're going on a 2-year journey with the Accentures and the McKinseys. They're going to dump all of the data into Snowflake and then use that as their basis. And there's now a better way to do that. You can give people a unified pane of glass. And I appreciate people almost scoff when you say the word unified pane of glass. It's so overused. But you can legitimately give people what looks and feels like a single CRM, abstracting the technology from the business users. And once you've actually delivered the amazing outcome to the business users, they don't care how you shuffle the data stores under the hood.
Yeah, it's actually, we see similar things in SMB. I think there's more transactions too. So it becomes a different type of problem, more complex in some areas, right? Less data in total for sure. But when you're a company that's bought 23 companies in the past 2 years, you have 23 different CRMs using 5 different providers that you're trying to figure out how to put together and grab, meaningful insights from that can give you a leg up against, competitive businesses.
Hugely so. Huge. And I think that's that's the second big opportunity in the PE space.
What do you say to the skeptics? I mean, you still see it on Twitter, I would say, from folks X now. God, what a lame old joke. But you still see it, folks on the web, like sort of saying, this bubble is worse than crypto. Like people that are in the know, I would say insiders, talking about how it's overblown. The technology doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Probably compounded by momentum from enterprises that aren't getting beyond the POC stage. Like, look, I'm a early stage venture capitalist. I'm no stranger to hype cycles. Like I've seen them. I've been caught up in them. But I don't know, man. Like the technology seems to get better like every week, and it's already really good. And personal coding projects that would have taken me weeks take me like hours. I don't know, like where do you think this, like, where does this come from? And like, what are people missing in the story, or what's going to change?
I made the point earlier about people experiencing the 30x productivity boost in their weekend project or their home projects. And so if no new innovation comes out from today, and if every large organization or SMB was able to absorb the new technologies, whether it's models, whether it's new platforms that are available, the pricing paradigms would change so dramatically. In large enterprises, about 70 to 85% of all activity is just to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
Every CEO, every leader wants to switch so that 15 to 25% of their activity is keep the lights on, and the remainder is all strategic work.
Yeah.
Sitting down and really listening to customers about what they need and being a true partner.
Yeah.
And so if nothing else happens, if no new tech comes out and enterprises are able to absorb and adopt what's there today, I think the world would be dramatically different. And that gives me tremendous confidence that this thing is not overhyped.
Yeah. Jimmy, how about you?
It's hard to say that like the other day factors beyond any of our control, causing the stock market to go down and stocks like Nvidia to go down.
Yeah.
And I'm watching my engineering team very quickly trying to load balance inference across multiple clouds to make sure we don't hit rate limits because they don't have enough GPUs provisioned to make it very easy for startups to do so. I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense to me,
Early.
Yeah.
We're early.
Yeah. So some parts of it, sure. And some novelty factors have worn off for certain things, and, write me a song and pretend you're, whatever, name your, right?
Like a Rolling Stone.
Yeah, exactly.
I do that every Friday night.
Yeah. But it's just getting started. And you see like DeepSeek inference gets cheaper, tuning gets cheaper, all of that. It's like, yeah, but we're just going to do more of it.
Yeah.
We're just going to do more.
Yeah. What about, sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. No, sorry.
I want to ask you. We can ask you a question.
No, well, it's at your pillow.
Okay.
No. You can do, but first I've got to ask another question. What do you think is going to happen to cost? Because there's part of me that, like, as someone that's kind of at least in the market side of this, it's like a lot of companies are out there with negative gross margins. Even if the gross margins aren't negative, like burn is really, really high. Like a lot of application layer companies being built on top of token allowances. So like, their costs aren't fully baked. At the same time, like today we're massively supply constrained by the number of chips that are available in data centers and power. And then we know that there are going to be more data centers built, like for sure. Like where is the cost going to go though? Like maybe in the medium term. I think long term, like the cost of everything valuable tends to go down, especially when it's something that's basically just converting the sun into a token. But what do you think?
I think the models, I think the amount of capital required to see the incremental gains or the exponential gains, in model accuracy, I think are becoming so capital intensive. I think someone mentioned that ChatGPT 4.5 was 10 times more expensive than
30 times more expensive than 4.0.
30 times.
Yeah.
And is it 30 times more accurate? No, it feels great. I love working with 4.5, but it's not 30 times better.
And they had to turn it off like immediately.
It's expensive.
Yeah.
Expensive to run.
Yeah.
I get my rate limit on that all the time.
Yeah.
Use mine wisely.
Yeah, and it's like there's two things that happen. One, AI companies and providers needed to figure out pricing models that made sense in users' minds at the time of this sort of like madness being kicked off. So you get like per user per month, and blah 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 blah, and you know the usage starts to tick up, and they sort of figure it out. But then as newer models get more capital intensive to train and run, and usage starts spiking like crazy, like you see OpenAI running into rate limit issues. You see they release an image generator that actually can make usable marketing images that don't look like someone on some sort of drugs made them, right? Like, like it looks pretty much like your marketing team. Yeah. Again, sponsored by Icebreakers.
Yes.
Take a break.
So like it's happening really, really fast. And then the second thing that's happening is in alternative pricing models or consumption models, there's not a good enough tie in pricing to value from the services. So it's like, oh, do you want to use 4.5? It's 30 times more expensive. Like, no, I don't. Are you writing an update to your investors like Frazer and it's going to cost you 30 cents instead of 1 cent? Like, I use it for that.
That's a good idea.
Nah. So there's not.
You're worth it, babe. You're worth it, babe.
This is just, again, like it's just abstracted away from users, and it's like you used it too many times, Connor. Go stop using it. But
I know.
Yeah.
If I could insert my credit card.
Yeah. It's not. So like people are figuring it out. It's going to take time. And again, there's like hardly any predictability around consumption. It's very expensive to make the models available to hundreds of billions of users at the same time. And there's not data on forecasting that. Mm-hmm. There's not data on how much, more inference is going to happen once this new feature comes out, once they get, recursion happens. So nobody, like, we're going to run into rate limit, usage limit, sorry, not available right now for the near future. And eventually it'll be solved. Mm-hmm. But price is not reflected in value when this is happening.
I think from a general purpose, kind of one-shot prompting, I think we're almost at a point of plateauing. I think it's almost, like if I think of all of the use cases and all of the conversations I've dealt with, where 4.0 is at the moment is good enough for 98% of all use cases.
Okay.
And so what's the untouched surface and where do these model companies go? And I think it goes into a toilet war, honestly, for the remaining providers.
Okay.
A price to zero, a race to zero.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be very interesting. I think model accuracy becomes a solved problem over time.
Yeah.
And therefore there is nowhere for it to go but to a toilet race.
Yeah. And I would think
thoughts?
No. So my thoughts are the price of anything that people want enough generally tends to fall unless price becomes a signal of quality, like in like the luxury goods segment. I'd say price, engineers are quite snobby, but like I would say price is not really a signal of quality today. And I think in production, like engineers aren't going to insist on one model versus another in the context of like building a framework of agents to deliver value to a customer. I
was very deliberate about the general purpose.
Yeah.
So the 98% of use cases.
Yeah.
For enterprise search, for automations and for software engineering.
Yeah.
There's a lot of progress that needs to be made.
Yes.
So I think that becomes a core focus.
Yeah. And when I think about it,
continue.
No, and when I think about it in the context of your businesses specifically, I would think one of the great risks really is that prices suddenly shoot up. And that the sort of your cost base is so high that for at least a little bit, SMBs, enterprise clients are like, I can't, like, there's no way the ROI is going to make sense for me. Whereas the lower they go, the more value add you can create on top of that.
So, Jimmy, I'd love to hear your response because Hatz does a great job of abstracting the actual model integration. You solve that problem for customers, which is amazing. So Llama, local models, open models are available to you. If Sarah Fryer and Sam Altman at OpenAI decide that they're 1000xing all of their pricing overnight, you're protecting your clients from that today, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having access to 30 different models at the same time, including, 12 open source models or whatever it is. I think we had 3 last night. It gives customers a lot of flexibility. But I think too, like the problem with going directly to a provider and not, working through someone like us is that you don't have control over rate limits and usage limits. So, like if I'm a 1,000-person company and I'm going, I don't know, where's it start in your world? 20,000 person company?
Yeah, just around 10,000.
10,000. Okay.
Yeah,
So
that's our starting point.
say I'm a 20,000 person company and I'm using AI so much that I'm able to function as a 10,000 person company, but my pricing is all tied to per user per month. All of a sudden, your bill gets cut in half as a user. Your bill gets probably 100x as a provider or 1,000x because it's being used so more.
Yeah.
And then it's trying to solve this with rate limits and sorry, not available right now, and upgrade to my $2,000 a month per user plan. And it's just not tied to value at all. So I think having lots of options is important. Back to the original point of this. And I think local models will be like I was talking to a friend yesterday, and he takes the train every day, and there's this Wi-Fi for a bit, and he's like, I just hate it because I'm working on coding and I can't there's one part of my train ride where I lose service every time, and I said, well, why don't you just load up a local model in your in your developer environment? And he's like, oh, I didn't even think of that. And today on his trade ride, that's what he did.
Nice.
And there's a time and there's a place for that.
Did it delete all of his code?
Yeah.
Drop star from table.
But yeah, exactly. But when you are working with lots of tools, or you're doing lots of recursion, or you're doing lots of intricate workflows, it doesn't work. So like, yes, we may get LLMs that run on our iPhone that can answer common questions in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. I don't know. You could probably find someone on one of these campuses over here to tell you that better than I can. Or we may, if you have a $4,000 laptop, you can, run some good models locally on your computer. And that may be true for a $500 laptop soon. I don't know. But realistically, it's going to stay in the cloud to do any sort of intensive workflow or in some server rack somewhere. Yeah. So I don't know how I transitioned to talking about local LLMs.
That's all right. Was that a SQL joke, by the way?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Cool. It was talking about abstracting users away from aggressive pricing strategies from the leading closed source models.
Right.
So you're able to provide that abstraction. So if, for example, OpenAI 1000x'd their pricing, you guys would be able to fall back on an open model.
Yeah, and we just tell our users like that's exactly what we did with 4.5. So in ChatGPT, for example, they don't let you upload documents to 4.5 on the Pro plan. I don't know if the Plus plan. I have the one that costs $20, so I don't know about the one that costs $200. But it's not an option. It's not an option for a lot of reasoning models, and there's a reason, because it gets very, very expensive to do so.
Yeah.
So with our users, we're like, hey, look, it's gonna cost extra to do this. We're never going to rate limit you. You can use it as much as you want, but just like, so there's probably a different model that can do the job almost as well or just as well, or maybe even better for, a 30th of the price.
Yes. And I think that's, again, coming back to the services and software. I think the companies that are providing these sort of outcomes into organizations, big or small, need to actually take that pain away for the clients that they're working with. They need to abstract that away. So you guys you do a fantastic job of that.
Thank you.
Love to see more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. We were talking about this earlier. It's, the initial users or evaluators or builders of AI products are, the ones that want no abstraction and granular what's happening to everything. And then the average users, they just don't. They just want it to work.
Yeah, agreed. Start with the why.
No.
Before we get back to the conference, this is a question that seems to be getting asked a lot when you get kind of AI folks together. They're starting to think about societal impact. You both have young children. I own many pairs of shoes. What are you?
You're thinking legacy.
What are you thinking about for the future? What skills do you want your children to have? What skills do you think are going to be irrelevant?
I think I often think about an old West Point philosophy, which is people have a combination of both character and competence. Mm-hmm. And so I think critical thinking and philosophy, there's an old famous Einstein quote that is if he had 60 minutes to solve a problem, he spent 55 minutes thinking about the question and 5 minutes on the answer. Mm. And so understanding what questions to ask, I think, is going to be incredibly key. Mm. I'm not an AI pessimist who thinks all jobs are going to be displaced and the AI may decide to keep us around like pets because we're cute and funny. I think a similar view emerged around the rise of the personal computer in the 70s and 80s, that people like accountants were going to be displaced.
Yeah.
So who's going to need a ledger? What are accountants going to do with their time?
Yeah.
And I think roles change. And I think roles will change.
Oh, same with the spinning jenny. But a spinning jenny would actually take your hand off.
Yes.
AI system will.
For now.
Unlikely to.
Yeah, for now. For now. Yeah. But I'm incredibly positive about the future. I think the role of AI as it bleeds in from data analytics and bleeds more into the physical world, I think it's going to have huge positives, benefits. I'm very, very excited around the rise of the humanoid robot at home. So sitting down with my humanoid on a Sunday and talking through my menu for the week, my humanoid robot deciding what food to order from which vendors based on what price points I'm feeling that particular week, cooking healthy breakfasts, lunches and dinners. And I think very importantly, ensuring that the 30% of food that's created in the world that doesn't make it to the dinner table, that we use actually technology and specifically bridging from AI into robotics to help solve a lot of that issue.
Mm. Yeah, I think, if you're asking, should my child study computer science or not, I don't have an opinion on that. I think probably yes. I don't think that job's going away, as fast as people think. I guess I do have an opinion.
Yeah. That sounds like an opinion.
Yeah, that sounds like an opinion. Mm-hmm. Critical thinking, like Conor said, humanness. So anything that comes in that realm, right? So philosophy, design thinking, working on intuition, being able to communicate with people, being able to communicate well, writing well. I think our education system has a huge problem right now, where, when I was in college, sort of e-testing came, was coming up, and as it came up, people, made it really easy to cheat on e-tested, and it's A, C, B, E, D, and people are taking exams at home and nobody's really learning anything, and they're passing the test. So, but you couldn't fake a 5-paragraph essay or a 20-page or a 40-page research paper. Now you can do that in 5 minutes. So I think that flips a lot of.
I mean, I really shouldn't comment on this, but I can't not right now. You hear about all these existential issues in the education system. How do we test fairly? How do we test equitably? Whatever that means.
Yeah.
Give them a pen or a pencil and lock them in a room with supervision and make them answer questions.
Yes.
It's ludicrous.
But is rote learning, which has been the success metric for education, people who can regurgitate facts, is that the idea of education? Is it preparing people for the workforce? Is that the idea of education?
At the end of the day, the way of the autodidact has always been the one that yielded things that were interesting and brilliant and novel. But there is a framework. It's the only one we've ever had the like success of humanity as a species over the last 200 years specifically would be, I think, a testament to the fact that it's at least like somewhat effective. I don't know. I think in the humanities it becomes more complex than it does for frankly the things that are slightly more practical. Whether it's accounting or mathematics or physics. I mean, you can just change the numbers and make sure that somebody demonstrates mastery of underlying intuitions. Now, like, rote learning for history, that's a little bit complex.
Yes,
but
yes.
Again, it's also a function of style, but you can still learn to structure your arguments, which are like principles that people should kind of, that we should sort of align on and people should master. And then there are like underlying pieces of data that you wouldn't collect if you hadn't understood the source material. So,
agree. You need foundations. You build upon foundations into expertise.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm not, proposing solutions to any of these things. That's not my problem to solve. I'm just pointing them out. Like another one, there's going to be a break in our legal system. What if when everyone's personal AI can sue anyone over anything and anyone can file a complaint or read terms and conditions or a contract in 2 seconds and come up with reasons why it was broken? The litigiousness of the average of the culture of Americans can really, really manifest when it's the click of a button to file a lawsuit or appeal a ticket or I don't know, sue Amazon. I don't know what it is, but something's going to break eventually. So I think there's going to be all sorts of problems that come up.
Not the payments infrastructure.
No. The payments infrastructure will have a lot of business when everyone can file their class actions lawsuits.
Exactly. And they'll be using Tally.
Yes.
You two, thank you so much for being on the show. Always a pleasure. If you want to sound off with any recommendations for the audience or sources where they can find out more things about you that are relevant or your companies or work with you, this is you both have the floor. Jimmy, you go first.
Well, I'd say definitely follow Conor on LinkedIn. He's a great
influencer, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't have the official influencer tag that Jimmy has. So Jimmy was very kind to post about our launch last week, which was very exciting.
Very exciting.
And I got an alert on LinkedIn to let me know that an influencer had actually commented, which is great. Yeah. So thank you, Jimmy. Awesome. Very, very kind.
You're welcome.
I'd encourage people to read. There's 2 books. Probably going to have to drop them in the comments because I can't remember who wrote the book.
I know you have the memory of a goldfish.
Yeah, I do. It's been a long day so far. So we're excited to keep going. Yeah. But one is Chip Wars, and it's about the rise of the silicon chip.
Yeah.
The book is split into 3 segments. The first 2 are incredibly relevant. How this all began, why globalization led us to have the dispersed ecosystem and supply chain and complex supply chain that we have. Mm-hmm. Fascinating review. The last third is a bit more subjective about what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
So stop after 2/3. I'd probably reread those. And the second is a book on machine learning, and I'll drop it into the comments.
Tremendous. Chip Wars and book in the comments. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Frazer. Thanks for having us, pal.
Thanks for having us.
That was great. Thanks, buddy.